First, the civil war in Sudan is amongst the world's worst. At least 20,000 people have been killed, and an unprecedented man-made famine triggered by an ego clash between rival generals. One who leads the army, the other the RSF paramilitary. And yet the war attracts fatally little diplomatic action. As international leaders meet in New York for the UN General Assembly, the body's Secretary General has raised alarm about the escalation in the Sudanese conflict. Also, on Wednesday, the US pledged $24 million in humanitarian aid. And a ministerial meeting did try to ramp up more support. Humanitarian chiefs, though, want to see more being tangibly done at the diplomatic level.
We urge member states to use all their leverage to bring the horrific violations of international humanitarian law and the abuses of human rights law to an end. Second, we need a concerted diplomatic push for a step change in humanitarian access, for the safe, streamlined, and swift delivery of aid through all possible routes.
Now, Kholood Khair is a Sudanese activist who was at that ministerial meeting on Wednesday. She joins me now from New York. Kholood, first of all, you were also at UNGA a year ago trying to keep attention on what's happening in Sudan. Have you seen enough progress at the diplomatic level over the last year?
Short answer is no, and that's because the needs have grown exponentially since last year. I mean, since last year, we've had a famine declaration. We have had evidence of genocidal attacks and atrocities. We have had a deepening humanitarian situation. We have had, the world's largest displacement crisis, the world's largest child displacement crisis in Sudan, and we also have the world's largest protection crisis in Sudan, with conflict-related sexual violence going through the roof. And because of that, what we're seeing just in the past 2 days of being here in New York is nowhere near enough from any of the member states, as well as the UN Secretariat, that goes anyway into, fully addressing what's the needs in Sudan.
So in those conversations that you were party to on Wednesday, what kind of things are you hearing? I mean, for example, one aspect is how over the last year or so, it's become increasingly apparent the war that started last August has components that in some ways make it a proxy war. Did that come up at any of the talks that you witnessed either on Wednesday or earlier in the week?
No, it hasn't, at least not in the open sessions that we have been privy to. As I understand, there is a closed session today, which might have much more frank conversation. But for example, today's session, which you just recently showed, had a group of countries assembled that are frankly very much part and parcel of the continuation of this war. You had United Arab Emirates, you had Egypt, you had Saudi Arabia, you had Qatar. All of these countries we know, and we have very good evidence of, that they are fueling the conflict by supporting one party or the other. And so in many ways, this humanitarian funding session today that had all of these countries in it is sort of like humanitarian gaslighting. All of these countries are able to come and sit and say that they feel for the people of Sudan, that they're aware of the sort of state collapse of the humanitarian situation, the worsening humanitarian situation in Sudan. And this kind of forum allows them to be able to both fund the war in Sudan and arm the war in Sudan, and then, express their sympathy and put, frankly, a pittance for most of them on the table for humanitarian response in Sudan. There has to be a way to do this better, and there has to be a way for other countries that are truly concerned for the Sudanese people to hold the countries that fuel this conflict to account. Now, what we know is the United States, which gave around $424 million pledged today, is also the country that 2 days ago embraced Mohammed bin Zayed, the ruler of the United Arab Emirates, who the UN's own reporting has found is very much part of the problem, effectively, that they are funding the RSF, that they are arming the RSF. And those two things cannot exist in the same universe. What we need to see is much more pressure on countries like the UAE, but also like Egypt, like Qatar, like Saudi Arabia, like Russia and Iran, who are sending arms to Sudan from other member states, and we just haven't seen any traction on that.
And when it comes to elements of the conflict itself on the ground, they have been growing concerned about the imminent fall of the Darfuri city of El Fasher, which has been under siege from the RSF for months now. Get us up to speed with what you understand to be happening there at the moment, and whether there's been much diplomatic engagement on that front.
Well, sources on the ground as well as satellite imagery confirm that the RSF is making some gains in parts of Al-Fashir. But we are also seeing some of the joint forces, these are armed groups that signed a peace agreement several years ago, are pushing back as much as they can. Now, the general trend, and this has been the general trend since April, is that the RSF are still likely to take Al-Fashir. The issue there is that once they take Al-Fashir, the atrocity risk goes through the roof. And this is something that we know will happen. This is the sort of pre-Rwanda moment where everybody knew exactly what was going to happen in Rwanda and did absolutely nothing to stop it. And we are seeing that moment in Al-Fashir right now. And the world, it's not like the world doesn't have information at hand, they very much do. We haven't seen, with the world assembled here in New York over this week, anywhere near the level of concerted diplomatic pressure on the RSF, on their backers, to really push back away from that eventuality or that scenario.